fight, we fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
This is an incredibly dangerous situation.
Staff members have been told to go into their offices.
Everybody stay down.
We have seen guns drawn in the House chamber.
If there was one positive that might have been taken from the sheer horror of the attack on America's Capitol last year, it was that Republicans might finally have a reason to disown Donald Trump and move on once and for all.
Look at this. These protesters are inside Statuary Hall. It's hard to believe what we're seeing right there.
But a year on, as Joe Biden chose the same hall invaded by the pro-Trump mob for his address today to the nation, the reality is that nothing has changed. Trumpism is still the dominant force in American politics.
Former President of the United States of America has created and spread a web of lies about the 2020 election. He's done so because he values power over principle and because his bruised ego matters more to him than our democracy or our Constitution. He can't accept he lost.
It was a speech Joe Biden could have made a year ago, calling out Donald Trump for his lies and still promising to restore democracy. He didn't mention him by name, but there were 16 references to the former president, something Joe Biden told us was necessary to recognize the extent, he said, of the wound.
You can't pretend. You got to face it. That's what great nations do. They face the truth, deal with it, and move on.
Mr. President, has anything changed in this country a year on? For a brief while, a year ago, it looked like the Republican Party might move on. Remember what Mr. Trump's staunchest allies said?
The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress.
President Trump is responsible.
Yet the majority voted not to certify Joe Biden's election, and within the month, Kevin McCarthy, the top Republican in the House, was cozying up to Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. The Republican whitewashing had begun.
We have learned no lessons, and the country is every bit as tribalized, every bit as politically polarized.
There's lots of talk about civil war. Do you think that's extreme? Where does this go?
We're not talking about civil war. What we are talking about, very plausibly, is a constitutional crisis in 2024, where the federal election has been compromised and broken. And that's one of the reasons why the midterm elections in November 2022 will be the most important of American history.
Fight for Trump! Fight for Trump!
That's why, despite the horrific events of January the 6th, Trump is eyeing the midterms and has endorsed only those Republicans who've embraced his big lie. Far from being ostracized, his grip on the party now stronger than ever. Hence today, the Republican side of the chamber was empty for the moment of silence in the names of the 5 people who lost their lives a year ago today. Save for Liz Cheney, a rare Republican who's dared stand up to Trump alongside her father, Dick Cheney, the former vice president, in an era when the Republican Party was bigger than one man. And the idea of an insurrectionist mob attacking the Capitol was the stuff of Hollywood. Well, Vice President Cheney spoke to reporters after being in Congress there and said of the Republicans, it's not leadership that resembles any of the folks I knew when I was there. Of course, the de facto leader of the Republican Party, Donald Trump, he's been emailing out statements all day saying the real insurrection happened on November the 3rd when he lost the election, of course, to Joe Biden, and saying that the Democrats want to own this day so that they can stoke fear and divide America. I say let them have it, he said, and it does feel like the Republicans have heeded his words here today. I've been around Congress all morning, walking through the halls, and senior Republicans are demonstrably absent. They have stayed away. Also, I should say, have protesters. They're not here either, although I did manage to speak to one, a member of the QAnon conspiracy theory, who was here last year and who I interviewed, and he told me that he stayed away. He wasn't going to fall for the trap of coming here again and being blamed for what happened last year. And crucially, he told me that he believes now more than ever that Trump did win the election in 2020. And when I asked him if he thought Trump was going to stand again, he said he's not going to need to run in 2024 because he will be reinstated before that, guaranteed. I also spoke to Michael Fanone, the DC police officer who you'll recall was dragged down that corridor and viciously beaten and kicked by Trump supporters. And I asked him how he felt today, and he simply looked at me and his eyes welled up and he just shook his head in disbelief. And I think you have there the stark contrast evident in today's America on this, the anniversary of what must be one of the darkest days in its history.
Siobhan Kennedy, thank you very much indeed. Well, earlier I spoke to the Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, who was inside the House of Representatives when the mob stormed the Capitol building. And I began by asking what she, first of all, thought of President Biden's speech, but also of the fact that millions of Americans still believe that the election was stolen.
I think it was a very powerful speech. I think he called upon Americans to really reflect about what happened a year ago and not to dwell on the past, though we need to learn from the past, but ask ourselves if we want to be a nation that normalizes violence.
When you have more guns in private hands than there are citizens in the United States, something like 400 million, is there not a real danger, given the tribal and bitter divisions in your country, that you could get, I'm not saying civil war necessarily, but certainly civil strife on a massive scale?
There are some historians that say the tensions and the divisions on our country are almost as intense now or worse than they were before the Civil War. I think there are a lot of factors that go into it. Ready accessibility of guns. I believe in the right to bear arms, but I do think that we need to be doing background checks. We need to make sure that people who have mental health issues, et cetera, and could use them in the wrong way.
Do you fear armed conflict on the streets of America?
Now, I'm not going to fear that armed conflict right now because I'm going to work with a lot of other Americans to make sure that that doesn't happen. I know I can't take what I have for granted. I think that security that I had as a child, that my freedoms would always be there, are something that I've got to work to protect.
Former President Trump, speaking today, called the speech given by President Biden political theater, there to distract from all the things that have gone wrong. He does have a point, doesn't he? Because the record, let's face it, of the last year in power by the Democrats, by your president, hasn't exactly been rosy.
Well, we can also talk about how President Trump is trying to distract from what he did and how he contributed to what happened at the nation's capital a year ago. I think that we have to be accountable for exactly what we are delivering to the American people and talking about it. But I'll remind people that a year ago, President Trump was still president and COVID was raging and we weren't encouraging people to get vaccinations. And, we're back in another COVID surge. We've got to work on that. But we did get shots in people's arms. We got people back to work. We got kids back in school. We're still discussing those issues.
The hasty withdrawal from Afghanistan has created an impression of American weakness around the world, for which the rest of the world, and possibly America itself, will pay a very heavy price.
It wasn't our finest moment, but it wasn't our worst moment either. And what we've got to do now is to meet our moral obligations to the people of Afghanistan, those that helped us, and how do we continue to fight or contribute as a member of a broader global coalition to peace in this world.
Just one more briefly, the investigation into the events that happened exactly a year ago today is still ongoing. There still is no conclusion. If you don't hurry up, if Congress doesn't hurry up, then and the Republicans win in November, then that investigation will just get buried, won't it?
Well, first of all, it's January and the elections aren't until next November. I think the truth is what matters, and you don't hurry the truth. So I want to see this investigation not be political. I want to see it gather the facts, and I think that that will happen prior to next November.
Congresswoman Dingell, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.